Called a working-class nobody, I slashed the funds and issued a 5-year ultimatum. Then the bank and the doctors hit back the same day. The phone buzzed against my kitchen counter at exactly 8:37 on a Tuesday morning. I was stirring honey into my coffee, watching the steam curl up toward the window where morning light filtered through curtains my wife had hung 23 years ago, before the cancer, before everything changed, I almost didn't check the message. These days, my phone mostly carried notifications about prescription refills and early bird dinner specials at restaurants I'd never visit alone. But something made me reach for it, maybe the same instinct that had kept me alive through 40 years of construction work and 3 heart attacks. The message was from David, my son, 2 words that would shatter everything I thought I knew about family, loyalty, and the man I'd raised with my own hands. We're done. I stared at those words until they blurred. We're done. Like I was some business deal gone bad. Like 32 years of birthday parties and Little League games and college tuition payments meant nothing. Like the man who'd walked him down the aisle just 18 months ago when his mother couldn't be there to see it had suddenly become disposable. My hands started shaking, and it wasn't from the coffee. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Because what happened next changed everything, and I guarantee you won't believe how far a father's love can turn into something else entirely when that love gets thrown back in his face like garbage. You see, I spent 6 decades building something. Not just a construction business that employed 27 people in this small Indiana town. Not just the house where David learned to ride a bike in the driveway I'd poured with my own concrete. I'd built a legacy, a future. A reason for every 16-hour day, every missed dinner, every weekend spent working instead of fishing. That legacy had a number attached to it. $2.4 million, sitting in accounts and investments that I'd carefully assembled like blueprints for my son's security. Money that was supposed to take care of David and his new wife, Sarah, for the rest of their lives. Money that represented every sacrifice, every choice to work instead of rest, every dollar I didn't spend on myself because I knew it would matter more in his hands. But here's what I learned that Tuesday morning, standing in my empty kitchen with those 2 words burning my eyes. Money doesn't buy you respect, sacrifice doesn't guarantee gratitude, and sometimes the people you love most are the ones capable of cutting deepest. The backstory starts 3 months earlier at David's wedding reception. I'd just finished my father of the groom speech, the one where I'd managed not to cry while talking about watching him grow from the boy who used to help me measure lumber into the man who'd found his perfect partner. The applause was still echoing when Sarah's father, Richard, cornered me by the open bar. "Jim," he said, adjusting his Rolex like he needed to remind everyone in the room what success looked like. "We should talk about the kid's future, financial planning, estate management, that sort of thing." Richard owned 3 car dealerships and had opinions about everything from wine pairings to property taxes. The kind of man who'd never swung a hammer, but somehow managed to look down on people who had. I'd been polite to him for David's sake, but something in his tone that night set my teeth on edge. "I've got David covered," I said, keeping my voice level. "Have for years." "Oh, I'm sure you do." His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "But Sarah's accustomed to a certain lifestyle. Private schools, country clubs, European vacations, the finer things that make life worth living." The finer things. Like the finer things had built his dealerships or put food on his table or paid for the education that taught him to speak to working men like they were children. "David knows he'll inherit everything when the time comes," I said. "Until then, he's got a good job and a strong work ethic. That's more than most kids get." Richard's laugh was sharp enough to cut glass. Jim, you're thinking like a working man. These kids don't want to wait for inheritance. They want to live now, while they're young enough to enjoy it." I should have walked away, should have gone back to my table and enjoyed watching my son dance with his new bride. Instead, I asked the question that started everything falling apart. "What exactly are you suggesting, Richard?" His eyes lit up like he'd been waiting for this opening all night. "Early inheritance. Gift them a substantial amount now. Tax advantages, immediate impact on their quality of life, and Sarah won't have to adjust her expectations downward. Adjust her expectations downward. As if marrying my son was some kind of financial disappointment she'd have to overcome. How substantial are we talking? I asked, though part of me already knew I wasn't going to like the answer. Well, Sarah and I were thinking somewhere in the neighborhood of 800,000, each, from both families. That would set them up with a proper house in the right neighborhood, establish their social standing, give them the foundation they need. $800,000, more money than I'd made in my first 15 years of business, money that Richard talked about like pocket change, like something you'd tip a valet. That's a lot of money, Richard. For a construction worker, maybe. But for a father who wants his son to succeed in the world Sarah comes from, it's an investment in his future. A construction worker. 40 years of building this town, employing families, creating something from nothing, and to him I was just a construction worker who'd gotten lucky. I excused myself and went to find David. He was at the head table, Sarah tucked under his arm, both of them glowing with newlywed happiness. When I approached, Sarah's smile faltered slightly, like she could sense the storm clouds gathering. Dad, great speech, David said, standing to hug me. Mom would have loved it. The mention of Linda hit like it always did, a punch to the chest that left me breathless for a second. She would have loved seeing him married, would have cried happy tears and fussed over every detail. Your new father-in-law had some interesting ideas about your future, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. David's expression shifted, became guarded. Dad, we were going to talk to you about that later. Maybe not tonight. Talk to me about what? Sarah's hand found David's arm, her perfectly manicured fingers squeezing in a way that looked supportive but felt possessive. Mr. Brennan, Daddy was just trying to be helpful. We know this is all very overwhelming. Overwhelming. Like I was some confused old man who couldn't handle complex financial discussions. Help me understand, I said, settling into the empty chair across from them. What kind of help are we talking about? David looked uncomfortable, kept glancing between Sarah and me like he was trying to navigate between two different worlds. It's just, Sarah's used to a certain lifestyle, and my salary at the firm isn't quite enough to maintain that right away. What lifestyle is that, son? The house we want is $750,000, Sarah said, her voice carrying the same condescending tone as her father's. It's in Willow Creek Estates, where all the other young professionals live. The mortgage alone would be $4,000 a month, plus taxes, plus association fees. $4,000 a month. I'd bought my first house for $18,000 total. The house where David had grown up, where Linda had planted roses that still bloomed every spring, where we'd built a tree house that was probably still sturdy enough for grandchildren to play in someday. That seems like a lot of house for two people just starting out, I said carefully. That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps people trapped in mediocrity, Sarah said, her mask slipping for just a moment. Daddy says the key to wealth is thinking like wealthy people, not like poor people who got lucky. The silence at our table was deafening. Around us, wedding guests laughed and danced and celebrated, but our little corner had gone cold as winter. David finally spoke, his voice quiet but firm. Dad, we're not asking for charity. We're talking about an advance on my inheritance, money that's coming to me anyway. Money that's coming to you when I'm dead, I corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Sarah's question hung in the air like smoke. I mean, what are you saving it for? You live in that same old house, drive that same old truck, eat dinner at the same 3 restaurants. It's not like you're enjoying the money. Every word was designed to cut, and she was surgical in her precision. My lifestyle, my choices, my contentment with simple things, all of it reframed as failure, as waste, as something to be embarrassed about. Sarah, David warned, but she was already committed to her path. I'm just saying, wouldn't it make more sense to help us build our future now, while we can actually benefit from it, instead of hoarding it like some kind of dragon sitting on treasure? Hoarding, like every dollar I'd saved was stolen from them somehow. Like my sacrifice was selfishness, my planning was greed. I looked at my son, really looked at him, trying to find the boy who used to sit on my shoulders at construction sites, who'd been fascinated by how buildings grew from nothing but plans and hard work. Instead, I saw a stranger wearing David's face, someone who'd learned to see his father through his wife's eyes. I need to think about this, I said, standing up from the table. Dad, wait, David started, but I was already walking away. I spent the rest of the reception watching from a distance as Sarah whispered in David's ear, as her parents held court with other wedding guests. as my son nodded along to conversations about investment strategies and tax shelters and all the things that mattered in their world. The world where I was just a construction worker who'd gotten lucky. That night, I drove home alone through streets I'd helped build, past houses I'd constructed, under streetlights installed by crews I'd supervised. Every corner of this town held my fingerprints, my sweat, my contribution to something lasting. But apparently, that didn't matter to the people who mattered most to me. I sat in my driveway for 20 minutes, staring at the house Linda and I had designed together. We'd drawn the plans on our kitchen table, arguing over window placement and closet sizes, dreaming about the family we'd raise inside those walls. Every board, every nail, every coat of paint had been chosen with love, with purpose, with the future in mind. Now it felt like a museum to a life that other people considered inadequate. The next 3 months were a masterclass in manipulation, disguised as family bonding. David called every Sunday, like he had since college, but now the conversations felt scripted, rehearsed. Sarah was always there in the background, her voice carrying just loud enough for me to hear her side of whatever coaching session was happening. "Have you given any more thought to our conversation?" David would ask, his tone carefully casual. "About the early inheritance?" "I'm still considering it," I'd reply, which was true. I was considering how a son I'd raised to value hard work and patience had turned into someone demanding instant gratification. I was considering how Sarah's expectations had become David's obligations. I was considering whether the boy who'd once helped me install drywall on weekends had disappeared entirely. "Dad, it would really help us get established," he'd press. "The housing market is competitive right now. If we wait too long, we'll get priced out of the good neighborhoods." Good neighborhoods, as if the neighborhood where he'd learned to ride a bike wasn't good enough for his children. The pressure intensified when Sarah got involved directly. She started calling me herself, usually when David was at work, her voice honey-sweet and carefully modulated. "Mr. Brennan, I hope you don't mind me reaching out," she'd begin. "I just wanted you to know how grateful I am that David has such a generous father." Generous. The word was a trap, a way to make refusing her requests seem petty and small. "I grew up in a family that believed in investing in the next generation," she'd continue. "Daddy always said the best gift parents can give their children is opportunity. And honestly, I'd love for our future children to have the same advantages I had growing up." Future children. She was weaponizing grandchildren I'd never met, using my love for family I'd never held against me. "Sarah, I understand you want the best for your family," I'd respond. "But there's value in building something yourself, in earning what you have." "Oh, absolutely," she'd agree, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "But why should David have to struggle when he doesn't have to? Why should we live in some starter home when we could be in a place that reflects our actual potential?" Our actual potential. Always coming back to the idea that where I'd raised David, how I'd lived my life, was somehow beneath their standards. The breaking point came on a Saturday in November. David invited me to lunch at some trendy downtown place where the sandwiches cost $18 and came with names like The Executive and The Influencer. The kind of restaurant that tried too hard to be impressive and ended up being pretentious. We'd barely ordered when Sarah arrived, claiming she'd finished her shopping early and thought she'd join us. But I could see the calculation in her eyes, the way she'd timed her entrance for maximum impact. "Mr. Brennan," she said, settling into the chair next to David like she owned it. "I'm so glad we have this chance to talk. David's told me so much about your business, about everything you've built." Here it comes, I thought. The setup, the compliments designed to soften me up for whatever request was coming next. "It must be incredibly rewarding to know that your hard work will benefit David and his family for generations," she continued. "That's such a beautiful legacy to leave behind." "I'm not dead yet," I said, more sharply than I'd intended. Sarah's smile flickered for just a moment. "Of course not. I just meant, well, legacy isn't just about what happens after we're gone. It's about what we do while we're here to see the impact." David reached for my hand across the table. "Dad, what Sarah's trying to say is that we'd love to have your support now, while you can be part of our success story." Part of their success story. Not the author of it, not the foundation of it, just a supporting player in someone else's narrative. "I've been thinking about your request," I said, pulling my hand back. $800,000 is a lot of money." It is," David agreed, his eyes lighting up with hope. "And we don't take that lightly. But it would change everything for us. The house, our social connections, Sarah's ability to build her interior design business with the right clientele." Interior design business. This was the first I'd heard of Sarah working at all, let alone having career ambitions that required my funding. "What kind of business?" I asked. Sarah straightened, her whole demeanor shifting into sales mode. "High-end residential design. But you can't break into that market without the right address, the right connections, the right image. Clients need to trust that you understand their lifestyle. And you need $800,000 to understand someone's lifestyle?" "We need $800,000 to live that lifestyle," she corrected. "To be authentic members of the community we want to serve." Authentic. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. What was authentic about buying your way into a community? What was real about a lifestyle funded by someone else's sacrifice? "Dad," David said, his voice taking on the pleading tone I remembered from childhood requests for toys and later privileges. "This isn't just about us, this is about your grandchildren. Wouldn't you want them to grow up in the best possible environment?" Grandchildren. The nuclear option, the one weapon I had no defense against. "What kind of environment is that, son?" "In private schools," Sarah jumped in. "Music lessons, language tutors, summer camps in Europe, the kind of experiences that create well-rounded, cultured individuals." "Like you?" I asked. She blinked, clearly not expecting the question. "Well, yes, I think I turned out fairly well. I looked at this young woman who'd married my son 6 months ago, who'd never worked a day in her life, who thought culture came from a checkbook and character came from a zip code, who'd convinced my son that the life I'd built for him wasn't good enough. Sarah," I said quietly, "what do you think I do for a living?" "You're in construction," she said, like the words themselves were distasteful. "I own a construction company. I employ 27 people. I've built half the commercial buildings in this town and probably a third of the houses. I've created something from nothing, provided jobs for families, contributed to my community for 4 decades. "That's wonderful," she said, but her tone suggested it was anything but. "My question is, what have you built? What have you created? What's your contribution to the world beyond spending other people's money?" The temperature at our table dropped below freezing. David's face went pale, and I could see him calculating how much damage this conversation would do to his marriage. "Dad," he said carefully, "that's not fair." "Isn't it? You're asking me to give you nearly $1 million so your wife can play interior designer for rich people while living in a house she can't afford. What exactly is unfair about asking what value she brings to that equation?" Sarah's mask finally slipped completely. "Value? Mr. Brennan, I bring breeding. I bring education. I bring social connections that could benefit David's career for the rest of his life. Just because you're content living like a working class, nobody doesn't mean your son has to." The silence that followed was absolute. Around us, other diners continued their conversations, oblivious to the fact that my family had just imploded over overpriced sandwiches and wounded pride. "Sarah," David whispered, horrified. But she wasn't finished. "I'm sorry if that sounds harsh, but someone needs to say it. David deserves better than this small-town, small-minded approach to life. He deserves to reach his full potential, not be held back by a father who thinks struggle builds character." I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. 40 years of building, creating, providing, reduced to working-class nobody by a woman who'd never earned $1 in her life. "David," I said, my voice surprisingly calm, "you have a choice to make. You can choose to be the man I raised, or you can choose to be the man she's turning you into. But you can't be both." I left $60 on the table to cover lunch and walked out into the November cold, knowing that something fundamental had just broken between my son and me. Something that might never be fixed. The calls stopped after that. The Sunday check-ins, the casual invitations to dinner, the pretense that we were still a family. David tried once, about 2 weeks later, calling to say Sarah was sorry for her outburst, that she'd been stressed about the house hunting, that maybe we could all try again. But I could hear it in his voice. He wasn't calling to apologize. He was calling to negotiate, to find a way to get what they wanted while managing my hurt feelings. "Son," I said, "I need you to think about something. Your mother and I, we saved every penny we could for your future. We went without vacations, drove old cars, bought generic groceries, all so you could have opportunities we never had. I know, Dad, and I'm grateful. Are you? Because grateful people don't demand early inheritance. Grateful people don't let their spouses insult the people who sacrificed for them. Grateful people don't treat family like a bank. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Dad, I love Sarah. I'm going to build a life with her whether you help us or not, but I'd rather do it with your support than without it. I understand that, David, but support and enabling are two different things. The line went quiet except for the sound of his breathing. When he spoke again, his voice had changed, hardened into something I didn't recognize. Dad, we found a house. It's perfect for us in Willow Creek Estates like we talked about. We need to move fast and we need the down payment. How much? $150,000 just for the down payment. $150,000 for a down payment on a house they couldn't afford with money they hadn't earned. That's a lot of money, son. It's an investment in our future, in your grandchildren's future. There it was again, the grandchildren card, played like an ace in a poker game where the stakes were my life's work. David, let me ask you something. If I died tomorrow, what would you do with the inheritance? Dad, don't talk like that. Answer the question. If you inherited everything tomorrow, what would be your first move? He hesitated, and in that hesitation, I heard everything I needed to know. We'd probably buy the house, he said finally, get established, make some investments. Investments like what? Sarah's business, maybe some real estate. Travel while we're young enough to enjoy it. Travel while they're young enough to enjoy it. With money I'd saved by not traveling, by not enjoying it, by choosing sacrifice over pleasure for 40 years. And after that? After that we'd be set. We'd never have to worry about money again. Never have to worry about money again. Because someone else had done the worrying for them. David, I'm going to tell you something your mother would have told you if she were here. Money doesn't solve problems. It reveals character. And right now, I'm seeing character in you that I don't recognize. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've become someone who thinks he deserves things he hasn't earned. Someone who lets his wife disrespect the man who raised him. Someone who treats his father like an obstacle to his lifestyle instead of the reason that lifestyle is even possible. The silence stretched between us like a canyon that kept growing wider. I'm not giving you the money, David. Dad, please, just think about it. We're not asking for everything, just enough to get started. You're asking for enough to become the kind of people who ask for more, and I won't be part of that. This is because of what Sarah said, isn't it? Dad, she was just upset. She didn't mean it. She meant every word. And so did you when you didn't defend me. I'm defending you now. No, you're managing me. There's a difference. David's voice cracked slightly when he spoke again. Dad, I need you to understand something. Sarah's pregnant. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Pregnant, a grandchild, Linda's grandchild, growing inside a woman who thought I was a working-class nobody. When, I managed. We just found out last week. It's early, but the doctor confirmed it. Dad, this changes everything. We need that house now. We need stability for the baby. A grandchild. The continuation of everything Linda and I had built together. The future we'd dreamed about during those long nights when she was fighting cancer, and we'd talk about holding our son's children, teaching them to fish, watching them grow up in the house where their father had been happy. Congratulations, I said, and meant it despite everything. Thank you. Dad, this is why the timing is so important. We can't raise a baby in our apartment. Sarah needs space for a nursery, a yard for the child to play in. We need to be in the right school district. The right school district? Not the school district where David had gotten an excellent education, where he'd played baseball and been valedictorian and learned the values that had supposedly shaped him into the man he'd become. A different school district. A better one. One that cost $150,000 to access. David, I raised you in a 3-bedroom ranch house with 1 bathroom. You turned out fine. Times have changed, Dad. The world is more competitive now. Kids need advantages. What advantages? Love, attention, parents who show up to their games and help with homework, or just expensive zip codes? Both. Dad, please. I'm asking you as your son, as the father of your first grandchild. Help us give this baby the best possible start in life. The manipulation was surgical in its precision. My son, my grandchild, the best possible start. All the pressure points that had controlled my decisions for 32 years, refined into a single request that felt impossible to refuse. But something had changed in me during that restaurant conversation. Something Sarah had said, the contempt in her voice when she'd called me a working-class nobody, had crystallized a truth I'd been avoiding. This wasn't about providing for my family anymore. This was about funding people who didn't respect the source of their funding. "I need time to think," I said. "How much time?" "I don't know. This is a big decision." "Dad, we need an answer soon. The sellers are considering other offers." Of course they were. Everything in David and Sarah's world was urgent, time-sensitive, requiring immediate action before some opportunity disappeared forever. "I'll call you next week." "Okay. Dad, I love you, and I'm grateful for everything you've done for me. I hope you know that." "I hope so too, son." But after I hung up, sitting in the kitchen where Linda had announced her pregnancy 33 years ago, I realized I didn't know that at all anymore. The next few days were a blur of sleepless nights and conversations with ghosts. I found myself talking to Linda's picture on the nightstand, asking her what she would do, what she would want me to do. "They're having a baby, honey," I whispered to her photograph one night. "Our grandchild. But they want me to pay for the privilege of being a grandfather." Linda's smile looked back at me from behind the glass, frozen in time from our 25th anniversary dinner. She'd worn her blue dress, the one that brought out her eyes, and we'd talked about growing old together, about spoiling grandchildren and taking them on trips and teaching them all the things we'd learned about life and love and building something that lasts. She'd never imagined that our grandchild would grow up thinking their grandfather was an embarrassment. I spent hours walking through the house, remembering. The room that had been David's nursery, where I'd assembled his crib at 2 a.m. while Linda tried to direct me from bed rest. The kitchen table where he'd done homework while I reviewed blueprints, both of us working side by side in comfortable silence. The backyard where I'd taught him to throw a baseball, to change a tire, to measure twice and cut once. Every room held evidence of a life lived with purpose, with love, with the kind of values that Sarah considered small-minded. On Thursday, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my attorney, Robert Chen, a man who'd handled my business contracts for 15 years and had helped me structure my estate planning after Linda's death. "Jim," he said when I walked into his office, "good to see you. How's retirement treating you?" "It's not," I said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Robert, I need to make some changes to my will." His expression shifted from casual friendliness to professional attention. "What kind of changes?" "I want to set up a trust, something that protects my assets, but gives me complete control over distribution." "That's certainly possible. Can you tell me what's prompting this decision?" I told him everything. The wedding reception conversation, the lunch confrontation, David's demands, Sarah's contempt, the pregnancy announcement that had been weaponized into emotional blackmail. Robert listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on his legal pad. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and studied me with the careful attention of someone who'd seen every variety of family dysfunction that money could create. "Jim, what you're describing is unfortunately common. Wealth can change family dynamics in ways that are difficult to predict or control." "What are my options?" "As well. You could restructure your estate to include conditions, educational requirements, employment milestones, charitable giving obligations. Many wealthy families use these tools to ensure their values are passed down along with their assets." "What about more immediate control?" "You could establish a revocable trust with yourself as trustee. That would give you complete discretion over distributions while you're alive, and you could modify the terms at any time." "And after I'm gone?" "You'd name a successor trustee, someone who shares your values and would distribute assets according to your wishes rather than the beneficiary's demands." I thought about that. Someone who shared my values, someone who understood that money was a tool, not an entitlement, someone who wouldn't be swayed by guilt trips or manipulation. "Robert, what if I don't want to leave everything to David?" The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Robert had known David since he was a boy, had watched him grow up, had probably expected him to inherit everything I'd built. "That's entirely your prerogative, Jim. It's your money, your choice. But I have to ask, is this decision coming from hurt feelings or from a genuine belief that David isn't ready for this responsibility? Both, I said honestly, but mostly the second one. He's become someone who thinks he deserves things without earning them, someone who lets his wife treat his father like hired help, someone who sees my life's work as his personal trust fund. Robert nodded slowly. Those are legitimate concerns, and frankly, inherited wealth often does more harm than good when the recipients haven't learned to manage it responsibly. So what do you recommend? Let's start with the trust structure. You maintain complete control while you're alive. After your death, assets are distributed based on criteria you establish now: employment requirements, community service, demonstrated financial responsibility, whatever matters to you. And if David doesn't meet those criteria, then the assets go elsewhere. Charity, other family members, whatever causes you care about. Other family members. I thought about my brother Tom in Arizona, who'd built a small plumbing business and raised 3 kids who still called him every Sunday. About my sister Rosa, whose children were teachers and nurses and social workers, people who contributed to their communities instead of just consuming from them. I want to think about this over the weekend, I said, but I want you to draft something preliminary, a trust that gives me control now and rewards character over entitlement later. Consider it done. I left Robert's office feeling lighter than I had in months. For the first time since David's wedding, I felt like I had options beyond just giving in or cutting him off entirely. That weekend, I did something I hadn't done in years. I drove out to Linda's grave and spent the afternoon talking to her about our son, about the choice I was facing, about the future I was trying to protect. He's having a baby, honey, I told her headstone, our grandchild, but he wants me to buy my way into that child's life. The wind rustled through the oak trees we'd planted when the cemetery was new, and I could almost hear Linda's voice in the sound. What would you do? I asked aloud. But I already knew the answer. Linda had always believed that the best gifts were the ones that required the recipient to grow. She'd made David earn his allowance, his privileges, his freedoms. She'd never just handed him things because he wanted them. She'd want me to do what was right, not what was easy. On Sunday evening, David called with news that made my decision easier. Dad, we got the house. The words hit me like a physical blow. You got the house. We put in an offer yesterday, and they accepted this morning, David continued, his voice bubbling with excitement I hadn't heard since he was 12 and hit his first home run. Dad, you should see this place. It's everything we dreamed of. 4 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a gourmet kitchen that Sarah's already planning to renovate, and the master suite has a sitting area that overlooks the golf course. I sat down heavily in my recliner, the one Linda had bought me for my 50th birthday, because she said I needed a place to rest after those long days on job sites. David, how did you afford the down payment? Silence stretched between us like a fault line about to crack. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note I'd never heard before. Defensive, but also something else. Defiant. We took out a bridge loan against my expected inheritance. The words didn't make sense at first. I had to repeat them in my head, parse them like a foreign language. Bridge loan, expected inheritance. You did what? D&S. Dad, it's completely legal. Sarah's father has connections at First National. They were willing to work with us based on your net worth and the fact that I'm your sole beneficiary. Sole beneficiary. Past tense, like my death was already a foregone conclusion, like my money was already theirs. David, let me make sure I understand this. You borrowed money against assets you don't own, that belong to someone who's still very much alive, to buy a house you can't afford. It's not that simple, Dad. This is how wealthy families operate. You leverage future assets to maximize present opportunities. Sarah's father explained the whole strategy. Sarah's father. The man who thought I was a working-class nobody had apparently become David's financial advisor, teaching my son how to spend money I hadn't given him permission to spend. How much did you borrow? Another pause. $200,000. $200,000, borrowed against money that existed only in their imagination, secured by the assumption that I would die on schedule and leave everything to a son who'd already spent it. David, what happens if something changes? What if I decide to modify my will? The silence that followed was deafening. Through the phone, I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, sharp and insistent, though I couldn't make out the words. Dad, why would you modify your will? I'm your son. This is my inheritance we're talking about. My inheritance. Not the money I'd earned through 40 years of 16-hour days. Not the sacrifice of every luxury, every vacation, every moment of relaxation I'd denied myself to build something lasting. His inheritance. Like it had always belonged to him and I'd just been holding it temporarily. Son, inheritance isn't a guarantee, it's a gift, and gifts are earned through respect, gratitude, and character. Dad, please don't do anything rash. We've already signed the papers. We're committed to this house. Our baby needs a home. Our baby. The grandchild I'd never met was already being used as leverage in a negotiation I hadn't agreed to participate in. When's the closing? 3 weeks. Dad, I know this seems sudden, but Sarah's father says timing is everything in real estate. We couldn't wait. Couldn't wait. Like patience was a character flaw instead of a virtue. Like planning and saving and earning your way to something was old-fashioned, thinking that had no place in their world. David, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I haven't agreed to anything. You've borrowed money against assets that I control, that I could change or donate or restructure at any time. You wouldn't do that. His voice carried absolute certainty. You're my father. This is my future we're talking about, your grandchild's future. The presumption was breathtaking. The assumption that my love for him meant automatic capitulation to his demands, that fatherhood was a contract requiring me to fund every poor decision he made. David, what if I decided to give everything to charity? What if I wanted to endow a scholarship fund in your mother's name? What if I chose to help families who actually need assistance instead of funding someone's country club lifestyle? Dad, that's crazy talk. You're not thinking clearly. Maybe you should talk to someone, get some perspective. Not thinking clearly. The same condescending tone Sarah had used, the suggestion that disagreeing with their plans was evidence of mental decline. I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months, son. Look, we can discuss this later. Right now, we need to focus on the positive. We're having a baby, we got the house, everything's falling into place. This should be a celebration. A celebration of debt, presumption, and entitlement, of a son who'd learned to see his father as an ATM with inconvenient emotions attached. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the phone, like it might explain how 32 years of love and sacrifice had led to this moment. My son had borrowed $200,000 against money he didn't own to buy a house he couldn't afford, all while treating my objections as obstacles to be managed rather than respected. I called Robert Chen at home. Jim, what's wrong? You sound terrible. I told him about the bridge loan, about David's assumption that my inheritance was his birthright, about the house that was already purchased with money that existed only in their imagination. Jesus, Jim, that's incredibly presumptuous and potentially dangerous for them financially. What do you mean? If anything happens to your estate plan, if you change your will or establish different distribution terms, they could be on the hook for a loan they can't possibly repay. David's salary won't cover the payments on $200,000. What would happen then? The foreclosure, bankruptcy, complete financial ruin. They've essentially bet their entire future on your money remaining available to them. I felt a cold satisfaction at those words, followed immediately by shame. This was my son we were talking about, my grandchild, but the satisfaction was stronger than the shame. And that told me something important about where my heart had traveled. Robert, I want to make those changes we discussed. Tomorrow, if possible. Jim, are you sure? This is a major decision. Maybe you should take some time to think it through. I've been thinking it through for 3 months. They've made their choice. Now I'm making mine. Monday morning found me in Robert's office at 8 sharp, signing documents that would reshape my family's future in ways they couldn't imagine. The irrevocable trust was a masterpiece of legal precision, giving me complete control over my assets while I lived and distributing them according to criteria I'd established. Employment requirement. David would need to hold steady employment and demonstrate financial responsibility for 5 consecutive years before receiving any distribution. Community service obligation. A minimum of 100 hours annually of volunteer work with organizations serving low-income families. Character assessment. A board of trustees, including my brother Tom, my sister Rosa, and Robert Chen, would evaluate whether David had demonstrated the values of respect, humility, and gratitude that Linda and I had tried to instill. If he meets all these requirements, Robert explained as I signed the final page, he'll receive the full inheritance. If not, the assets will be distributed to the scholarship fund you've established in Linda's name. The Linda Marie Brennan Memorial Scholarship Fund. Full college tuition for students from working-class families, kids whose parents built things with their hands and understood the value of honest work, kids who wouldn't look down on their benefactor's background or lifestyle. And David won't know about these changes until when? Until your death, or until he fails to meet the loan obligations and comes to you for help. Then you can choose to tell him or not. I walked out of Robert's office feeling like I'd just performed surgery on my own heart. It hurt, but it was the kind of hurt that meant healing was possible. The call came 2 weeks later, on a Thursday afternoon while I was working in the garden Linda had planted. David's voice was tight with panic. "Dad, we have a problem with the house." "What kind of problem?" "The bank wants additional documentation for the bridge loan. They're questioning some of the asset valuations." Of course they were. Someone at First National had probably taken a closer look at lending $200,000 against an inheritance that could be changed at will. "What kind of documentation?" "They want copies of your will, your trust documents, current account statements. They want to verify that the inheritance is actually going to be available when they expect it to be." "And what did you tell them?" "I told them you'd cooperate. Dad, this is just a formality, a technicality." "A technicality." Like my privacy, my right to control my own financial information was just an inconvenience in their real estate transaction. "David, I'm not providing those documents to your bank." "What, Dad, you have to. We'll lose the house." "Then you'll lose the house." The silence stretched between us like a chasm that kept growing wider with each passing second. "Dad, please. Sarah's already started planning the nursery. We've told everyone about the house. Her parents are so proud." Her parents, the people who'd orchestrated this entire disaster, were proud that their daughter had successfully manipulated my son into financial catastrophe. "Son, let me ask you something. If I died tomorrow, what would you do with the money?" "Dad, don't talk like that. Answer the question." "I'd pay off the loan, obviously. Set up college funds for the baby. Maybe help Sarah's business get started." "And after that?" "After that, we'd be secure. We'd never have to worry about money again." Never have to worry about money. The phrase that revealed everything about how they saw wealth as a problem-solving tool rather than a responsibility. "David, do you know how much money I made last year?" "What do you mean? You're retired." "From my investments, from the business I built. Do you know what my annual income is?" He was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, maybe 50,000? 50,000? He thought I lived on 50,000 a year while sitting on millions, like some kind of miser hoarding wealth for its own sake. "I made $340,000 last year, from investments, rental properties, and consulting work." "That's great, Dad. That's more than enough to cover the documentation the bank needs." He'd missed the point entirely. The fact that I earned more in a year than most people earned in 5 while living like someone on a fixed income proved nothing to him except that I had more money available for his use. "Nah, David, the reason I live modestly isn't because I'm cheap. It's because I understand that wealth is responsibility, not license. Every dollar I don't spend is a dollar that can work for something larger than my immediate gratification." "Like what?" "Like your future, like your children's education, like helping people who actually need help instead of funding someone's lifestyle upgrade." "Dad, we do need help. We're about to lose everything." "No, you're about to lose something you never actually owned. There's a difference." I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, urgent and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. "Dad, Sarah wants to talk to you." Before I could object, she was on the line, her voice stripped of its usual false sweetness. "Mr. Brennan, I don't know what game you're playing, but you're destroying your son's future out of spite." "Sarah, I'm not playing any game. You borrowed money against assets you don't control. That was your choice." "Those assets belong to David. He's your son." "Those assets belong to me. David is my son, but that doesn't make him my owner." "You're being unreasonable. All we need is some documentation to satisfy the bank. It's not like we're asking you to actually give us money right now." Right now. The qualifier that revealed everything about their timeline, their expectation that money would flow to them eventually, that my cooperation was just a matter of when, not if. Sarah, let me be very clear about something. I don't owe you documentation. I don't owe you cooperation. I don't owe you anything. You owe your son support. You owe your grandchild a secure future. I owe my grandchild a grandfather who demonstrates integrity, someone who shows them that respect is earned, not demanded. Your integrity is going to cost us our home. Your presumption cost you your home. I'm just declining to fix your mistake. She hung up without another word, leaving me standing in Linda's garden with the phone buzzing in my hand and the satisfaction of finally saying what needed to be said. That evening, I made a decision that felt both inevitable and liberating. I called my broker, Marcus Williams, who'd been managing my investments since Linda's death. Marcus, I want to liquidate some assets. How much are we talking about, Jim? Everything. I want to convert my entire portfolio to cash. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Jim, that's a major move. Are you sure you want to do this? Your portfolio is performing well, and liquidating everything will trigger significant tax implications. I'm sure. How quickly can it be done? Most of it within a week. Some of the real estate investments might take longer, but the stocks and bonds can be converted immediately. Do it! After I hung up, I walked through my house with new eyes. Every room, every piece of furniture, every photograph on the wall represented choices I'd made, sacrifices I'd accepted, dreams I'd deferred for someone else's benefit. Now, for the first time in 40 years, those choices were entirely my own. The next morning brought a text from David that made my blood run cold. Dad, we need to talk. Sarah's in the hospital. I called David immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. Despite everything between us, Sarah was carrying my grandchild. Dad, thank God you called back. David's voice was raw, exhausted. She started bleeding this morning. We're at Memorial Hospital. Is the baby okay? We don't know yet. The doctors are running tests. Dad, I need you here. 30 minutes later, I was walking through the sterile halls of Memorial Hospital, past rooms filled with other people's crises, toward whatever waited in the maternity ward. I found David in the family waiting area, slumped in a plastic chair that had seen too many vigils, his expensive suit wrinkled like he'd slept in it. Any news? I asked, settling beside him. She's stable. The baby's stable. But she's on bed rest for the remainder of the pregnancy. He looked up at me with eyes that reminded me of the scared little boy who used to crawl into bed with Linda and me during thunderstorms. Dad, the stress from the house situation, the bank calling every day about documentation, Sarah thinks that's what caused this. The guilt hit me like a physical blow. My grandchild, Linda's grandchild, potentially in danger because of choices I'd made in anger. David, I'm sorry. I never wanted... I know. He rubbed his face with both hands. Dad, I've been thinking about everything, about what you said at lunch, what Sarah said to you. She was wrong, completely wrong, and I should have defended you. The apology I'd been waiting months to hear felt hollow now, sitting in a hospital corridor where my unborn grandchild was fighting for survival. What do the doctors say about the stress factor? They can't be sure, but Sarah's blood pressure was dangerously high when we came in. The doctor said pregnancy complications can be triggered by emotional stress, financial pressure, anxiety about the future. I stared at the industrial carpet beneath my feet, counting the threads while my conscience tore itself apart. Had my stand on principle put my grandchild at risk? Had my desire to teach David responsibility endangered the most innocent person in this entire mess? Dad, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. I looked up to find David watching me with an expression I'd never seen before. Not the entitled young man who'd demanded early inheritance, not the defensive husband who'd chosen his wife's version of reality over his father's feelings. This was someone who'd been stripped down to essentials by fear and uncertainty. Ask me. When you were building your business, when Mom was sick, when money was tight and everything felt impossible, what kept you going? The question caught me off guard. I thought about those early years, the loans I couldn't qualify for, the jobs that barely covered payroll, the nights I'd sit at this same kitchen table Linda and I had bought secondhand, trying to figure out how to make ends meet while building something that would last. Your mother, I said finally. The belief that what I was building mattered, that the struggle was worth it if it meant creating something bigger than myself. David nodded slowly. That's what I've lost, isn't it? The belief that struggle matters. Sarah's family, they've never had to build anything. They inherit, they leverage, they manipulate systems, but they don't create. Son, No, let me finish. I became someone who thought he deserved things without earning them. Someone who saw your life's work as my personal trust fund. Someone who let his wife call his father a working-class nobody without saying a word in defense. The words hung between us like a confession that had taken months to form. David, we all make mistakes. This wasn't a mistake, Dad. This was a choice. A series of choices that turned me into someone you didn't recognize. Someone I don't recognize. Before I could respond, a doctor in blue scrubs approached us, her expression carefully neutral in the way medical professionals learn to manage hope and fear. Mr. Brennan, I'm Dr. Patricia Morgan. Your wife is asking for you. David stood up, then turned back to me. Dad, will you come with me? Sarah wants to apologize to you, and I think we all need to have an honest conversation about what happens next. I followed him down a corridor lined with rooms where other families were dealing with their own crises, their own moments of truth that stripped away pretense and revealed what really mattered. Sarah looked small in the hospital bed, connected to monitors that beeped steadily, measuring heartbeats that included my grandchild's. Her face was pale, her usual perfect composure replaced by vulnerability that made her look younger, more human. Mr. Brennan, she said when I entered, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you for coming. I pulled a chair closer to her bed. How are you feeling? Scared. The word came out broken, honest in a way I'd never heard from her before. Scared for the baby, scared about what I've done to this family, scared that I've ruined everything that matters. David took her hand, and I could see years of marriage in that simple gesture, the love that had gotten buried under financial pressure and social expectations, and the toxic influence of people who measured worth by bank balances. Sarah, the baby's going to be fine, I said, though I had no medical authority to make that promise. You're both going to be fine. Mr. Brennan, I need to tell you something. She looked directly at me for the first time since I'd known her, without calculation or manipulation, just raw honesty. Everything I said about you, about your lifestyle, about being working class, it came from fear. Fear of what? Fear that I wasn't good enough for David. Fear that coming from money meant I didn't have any real value to offer. Fear that if I couldn't provide a certain lifestyle, he'd realize he'd made a mistake marrying me. The confession hung in the room like smoke, changing the shape of everything I'd believed about her motivations. So you decided to make me the problem, I said, not unkindly. I decided to make your values the problem. If I could convince David that simple living was failure, that contentment was settling, that building something slowly was wrong, then my need for immediate luxury would seem reasonable by comparison. David was crying quietly, tears streaming down his face as he listened to his wife deconstruct the worldview that had nearly destroyed our family. Sarah, why are you telling me this now? Because lying in this bed, worrying that I might lose our baby, I realized what actually matters. It's not the house or the neighborhood or what my parents think. It's this. She gestured between David and me. It's family that shows up when everything falls apart. It's people who love you even when you've given them every reason not to. I felt something shift in my chest, the first crack in the wall of resentment I'd built over months of hurt and disappointment. The house, I said. What happens now? David answered. We'll lose it. The bank called this morning. Without the documentation they need, they're calling the loan. We have 30 days. 30 days. A month to find $200,000 they didn't have, to cover a debt they'd incurred against money that no longer existed in the form they'd expected. And after that? Bankruptcy, probably. My credit will be destroyed. We'll lose everything except our car, and whatever personal possessions are exempt from seizure. I looked at this young couple, my son and his wife, facing financial ruin, because they'd confused their wants with their needs, their desires with their rights. 6 months ago, I would have felt vindicated by their situation, justice served, consequences delivered, lessons learned the hard way. But sitting in that hospital room, looking at Sarah connected to machines monitoring my grandchild's heartbeat, I felt something different. Not vindication, but sadness. Not justice, but waste. Not satisfaction, but regret that it had taken near tragedy to bring us to honesty. David, what would you do differently if you could start over? He thought about the question seriously, not rushing to give the answer he thought I wanted to hear. I'd live within our means. I'd build something instead of demanding something. I'd choose my father's respect over my wife's parents' approval. He looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. And I'd remember that wealth is responsibility, not license. The words I'd tried to teach him for months finally understood through his own experience rather than my lectures. Sarah, what about you? I'd learned to find security in what we built together instead of what we could extract from others. I'd measure success by character instead of address. And I'd apologize to you for every cruel thing I said, every assumption I made, every way I tried to diminish what you'd accomplished. The apologies felt genuine, born from consequence rather than manipulation. But apologies didn't solve practical problems, didn't erase debt, didn't change the reality of their situation. What do you need from me? I asked. The question surprised them both. David had probably expected continued punishment. Sarah had likely anticipated more lectures about values and responsibility. Neither had expected an offer of help. Dad, we don't expect you to fix this. We made these choices. We'll live with the consequences. That's not what I asked. I asked what you need. David and Sarah exchanged glances, communicating in the wordless way married couples develop over time. Honestly, David said, we need to start over, somewhere we can afford, something we can build together. We need to learn how to be the kind of people who deserve help instead of demanding it. I stood up from my chair and walked to the window overlooking the hospital parking lot. Below, people were coming and going, dealing with their own crises, their own moments of truth. Some would learn from their experiences and become stronger. Others would blame circumstances and learn nothing. Which kind of people had my son and daughter-in-law become? I liquidated my investment portfolio yesterday, I said without turning around. Converted everything to cash. The silence behind me was complete except for the steady beeping of medical monitors. Why? David asked finally. I turned back to face them. Because I realized something. Money sitting in accounts doesn't change anyone's character. It doesn't teach lessons or build values. It's just numbers on a statement until someone decides what to do with it. Dad, what are you saying? I'm saying that I have approximately $2.4 million in cash, and I need to decide what to do with it. I can let it sit there earning interest until I die, at which point it becomes someone else's problem. Or I can use it now to create the kind of change I want to see in the world. Sarah was crying now, tears streaming down her face as she began to understand where this conversation was heading. The house, she whispered. You could save the house. I could save the house. I could pay off your bridge loan, cover your down payment, make your monthly mortgage payments for the next 30 years. I could solve all your immediate financial problems with a single wire transfer. Hope flared in David's eyes, followed immediately by wariness. After months of conflict, he'd learned not to trust easy solutions. But, he said, that would teach you nothing. It would turn you back into people who believe problems can be solved with other people's money. It would make me an enabler instead of a father. The hope died in David's eyes, replaced by resignation that looked surprisingly mature. So what are you proposing? I pulled my chair closer to Sarah's bed, close enough to speak quietly, intimately, the way families should discuss their futures. I'm proposing that we start over, all of us. You'll lose the house, declare bankruptcy if necessary, and begin again with nothing but your own resources and whatever wisdom you've gained from this experience. And you, Sarah asked. I'll establish a fund, not for you directly, but for the values I want to see in the world. A fund that helps working-class families buy homes, that provides college scholarships for students whose parents build things with their hands, that supports small businesses started by people who understand the value of honest work. David was nodding slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. But, I continued, that fund will also have provisions for family members who demonstrate the character your mother and I tried to instill. People who work steadily, contribute to their communities, show respect for others regardless of their economic status, and understand that wealth is stewardship, not ownership. How would that work? David asked. 5 years of demonstrated responsibility, steady employment, community service, financial management that proves you can live within your means and save money even when it's difficult. After 5 years, you'd be eligible for assistance with a home purchase but not a handout. A loan at favorable terms that you'd repay through continued community involvement. Sarah was listening intently, her hand resting on her belly where my grandchild was growing. And if we don't meet those requirements? Then the money goes to other people who will. There are thousands of families in this town who would use that assistance to build something lasting instead of funding a lifestyle. The room fell quiet, except for the electronic symphony of medical equipment. David and Sarah were processing what I'd offered, not rescue, but opportunity. Not a solution to their immediate crisis, but a path toward earning their way back to security. "Dad," David said finally, "what you're describing, it sounds like it would take years to qualify for help." It would. 5 years minimum. Maybe longer if you don't demonstrate the character growth I'm looking for. We could lose everything while we're trying to prove ourselves. Yes, you could. But you've already lost everything that matters. Your self-respect, your family relationships, your understanding of what wealth actually means. What you'd be losing now is just stuff. Houses and credit scores and social status. Things that can be rebuilt by people with the right values. Sarah spoke up, her voice stronger than it had been since I arrived. "Mr. Brennan, if we do this, if we start over and try to earn our way back to your respect, what guarantee do we have that you'll actually help us in 5 years?" The question was fair, practical, the kind of thing someone should ask before committing to a long-term plan with uncertain outcomes. You don't have any guarantee. Just like I never had any guarantee that 40 years of sacrifice would be appreciated rather than taken for granted. Just like your mother never had any guarantee that the values she tried to teach you would stick. That's what faith means in families. You act on what you believe is right and hope it works out. David was holding Sarah's hand, both of them staring at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. Fear, maybe, or determination, or the kind of uncertainty that comes with facing a future that depends entirely on your own choices rather than someone else's resources. "If we agree to this," David said, "if we walk away from the house and start over with nothing, how do we know we can do it? How do we know we're strong enough to build something real?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for the first time in months I saw glimpses of the boy I'd raised, the one who'd helped me carry lumber when he was barely tall enough to lift one end, the one who'd asked endless questions about how things were built, how they worked, why they mattered. "Because you're my son," I said simply. "And despite everything that's happened, despite all the ways you've disappointed me, you still have Linda's heart and my stubbornness. That's enough to build on if you're willing to do the work." Sarah squeezed David's hand, and I could see them communicating without words, weighing their options, calculating their chances, deciding whether to bet their future on their own character rather than my bank account. "Okay," David said finally. "We'll do it. We'll start over, earn our way back to your respect. Prove that we can be the kind of people who deserve help rather than demanding it." "You're sure?" "We're sure." "Dad, I want to be someone my child can be proud of. Someone who builds things instead of just inheriting them. Someone who understands that love isn't measured by how much money you're willing to spend, but by how much sacrifice you're willing to make." I reached across the hospital bed and took both their hands in mine, feeling the weight of 3 generations in that connection. My hands, scarred from decades of construction work. David's hands, soft from office work but still strong enough to build something if he chose to. Sarah's hands, manicured, but trembling with the effort of holding our family's future together. "Then let's start building," I said. 6 months later, I received a text message that changed everything again. But this time, the words made me smile instead of breaking my heart. The message was from David, sent from the small apartment they'd rented after losing the house, after declaring bankruptcy, after starting over with nothing but determination and a renewed understanding of what actually mattered. "Dad, meet your granddaughter, Emma Rose Brennan, born 7 pounds 4 ounces and already showing signs of the family stubbornness. We love you." Attached was a photo of the most beautiful baby I'd ever seen, wrapped in a blanket I recognized as one Linda had crocheted years ago, saved in our cedar chest for the grandchildren she'd never lived to meet. But she was meeting this one, in the love that had shaped our family through 4 decades of marriage, in the values that had survived even our darkest moments, in the hope that each generation could learn from the mistakes of the last and build something better. I drove to the hospital that day, carrying flowers, a stuffed animal, and a heart full of gratitude for second chances, for the kind of love that survives even the worst betrayals, and for the possibility that families can choose to start over, to forgive, and to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their worst mistakes. The inheritance was still there, still earning interest, still waiting for the day when it could be used to reward character instead of funding entitlement. But that day felt less important now than this moment, holding my granddaughter while my son and daughter-in-law planned a future based on their own efforts rather than my resources. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the chance to discover their own strength. Sometimes love means saying no to what they want so they can learn to earn what they need. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, they'll thank you for it instead of texting you that you're done. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.